welcome to another edition of Digital Transformation Survivors. This podcast is really to bring together industry professionals, talk about their challenges. I mean, traditionally we talk on this podcast about managing complex web estates. We're interested to understand about the strategies that people bring together to manage, multiple audience segments, multiple business needs. But today is a little bit of a departure because we're going to be talking about payment gateways and fintech services. Again, from the perspective of looking at those multiple audience segments. But we thought it'd be really interesting to dive into that area. And I'm your host, by the way. I'm Julian Tedstone. I'm the director for Coherence. We specialise in figuring out how businesses manage this kind of stuff. And we're really here to do some learning. So today I'd like to introduce our guest, Paul Taylor. Paul Taylor is a transformation specialist, currently working the role as a product transformation lead. And that's something that we're going to be diving into a little bit more detail in the cast. Working at Worldline Merchant Services. And he's really got really extensive knowledge across the financial technology sector, various industries. And he really brings, I think, a really unique perspective on, I guess, organizational change, where technology might be the medium, but really it's about transforming how businesses operate through technology. And he's got a career that spans, multiple mergers, integrations, transformations, some really hand-on experience here, at the coalface of transformation. Both from the technology perspective and from the human aspects of change. So really, really excited and happy to welcome Paul today. Paul, welcome to Digital Transformation Survivors. How are you doing this morning?
Good, Julian. Thanks very much for having me. And I like the impressive introduction. You might need to write my CV in the future.
well, not a word of it a lie though, Paul. It's the gospel.
It's fair
that we have here.
It's fair. Certainly, what's on LinkedIn. Yes, indeed.
Okay, good, excellent. Well, listen, let's dive in. Really want to just start by helping the audience to understand a little bit more about yourself. So tell us about yourself. Tell us about your role at Worldline. I mean, give us a little bit of an idea about Worldline and its operations and I guess its market positioning as well. It'd be great to understand, and we'll take it from there.
Sure. So Worldline is the leading European payment service provider. Been going for many years. And is an amalgamation of a number of different payment service providers that we've acquired over a period. And we provide all types of payment services. So the whole payments chain, when you go in to a store and tap and pay by card, or on the e-commerce on your website when you're paying for your shopping on whatever online site it might be, we are managing all the payment services behind that. So connecting to your bank, connecting to the acquirers, and it's kind of one of those businesses, one of those things that happens in the background. Kind of nobody has any idea that it's kind of happening. We've big company, about 15,000 employees, several billion in terms of turnover. And my role there is I work in merchant services, which is really all the payment platforms, and work within product. And the main thrust of my job is transformation, effectively within the product arena. So I've called it product transformation. It's not necessarily transforming the products, but it is transforming the way in which we deliver those products and the way that we organize ourselves within the product organization.
And that in the conversations that we had leading up to this discussion today, that was quite a feature of our conversation. We're going to dive into that in a minute in a bit more detail. But I think there's just one thing I'd like to call out from that introduction, and that is that Worldline has grown through mergers, through acquisitions, and I think that's quite a common component of the challenges that we see, where that kind of like business growth strategy then drives quite a lot of technology outcomes and
and
team
change.
outcomes as a result. So and change, yeah. So what does that? How does that feel? From someone operating in the inside, how does that feel in terms of the kinds of things that you deal with? Help the audience to understand what you deal with on a daily basis.
So, yeah, good question. I mean, I guess a business or an organization or company that's resulted from multiple M&As, has a lot of kind of different things to deal with, different cultures, different platforms, different ways of working. And when a company consolidates and brings these together, they kind of want to converge to one way of operating. So a lot of what we do today is just that, and that comes with kind of multiple challenges. Um, on a day-to-day basis in terms of how people want to work, in terms of the maturity of certain parts of the organization, in terms of potentially dropping legacy products, dropping legacy platforms, moving towards a specific target. So all of that requires, transformation and change expertise. And on a day-to-day basis, and I'm probably going to talk about this later on. It often feels like a fight, a battle. It's
Yeah,
that kind of
yeah.
transformation. I'm sure there's many companies that kind of are on the crest of a wave, leading transformation and change. I tend to find myself in the ones that are kind of almost in a chaotic environment because so much is going on. Bringing that together and kind of finding one way forward is really what we're doing.
And you specifically see this as a product transformation activity. So help us understand what does that mean in terms of what you do, and I guess how is it differentiated from I guess the broader digital transformation activity?
So I guess it's two lenses on the same thing, I would think, right? What we've focused on, well, certainly my role in product transformation within Worldline Merchant Services has really been about how we organize ourselves and how we work. So Worldline has been quite it's a traditional engineering company, very good company, quite project centric, quite centrally focused, and a lot of what we've been doing is like many companies today. We're trying to kind of move towards a more empowered product organization, whereby product are empowered, strong, uh, often taking the direction of where we're going in terms of products, rather than it being kind of a sales-led approach. So moving towards that model has been kind of, for the last 2 years, really been the vision of what we've been doing. So that comes with that in terms of how our teams are organized. So moving, as I said, from quite a project-centric approach to a more product-centric approach. It also implies how we, decentralize some of the ways of working, if you like. So rather than a command and control from the top, there's, from the teams that are actually doing the work, there is the drive and the strategy coming, from those teams. So really, for us, it's been about how we're organised and the ways of working. I'll give you an example. One thing that we've brought in the last couple of years is OKRs. So that was shifting very much from an output-focused way of measuring how we work and our success to a more outcome-centric way of working, whereby we are, looking at the value that we bring as a product organization, rather than just delivering stuff, really wanting to understand and drive end to end how we launch our products and how they make a difference in the market. So that's one aspect of that's kind of that change in mindset. around how we've organised our product people.
And when we were preparing for this discussion, we talked a little bit about your kind of your leadership role, and it feels like the impression I got is that there's multiple products, so multiple teams, and there's also this sense of I guess like quite a lot of rapid change because all of these products are coming from different starting points, but I guess the aim is to get them to converge into I guess a common way of working, common set of principles. And the challenge there, and I think you mentioned the word chaos, is to like kind of like work with the chaos and turn it into something which is like at least manageable, like manageable. And we got to this definition of kind of leadership almost as a service to help
Yeah.
support that activity. It'd be great to get your thoughts on that.
And the word chaos. I mean, I like movies, Julian, and I like TV shows. And when you say chaos, it reminds me of that chaos is a ladder. Have you heard of that in Game of Thrones? When he says somebody says
Yeah.
chaos is a pit. No, chaos is a ladder. For this idea that you use chaos to kind of climb up. So when you say chaos, that's what it reminds me of.
I think that was Littlefinger, wasn't it?
It was.
I think it was Littlefinger that said that. Yeah,
it was. And you need to remind me what the question is. Actually, I just forgot. What's the question?
So the question. So the question is, like, amongst all this chaos, we were talking about the idea of leadership as a service.
Yeah.
So
yes.
You're almost like in there, kind of facilitating all of this change. You have a particular way of doing that.
So, I mean, my approach certainly in more recent years is I think transformation programs, and I'm not saying this doesn't work, but there is a tendency for transformation people and transformation leaders to sit alongside the organization. I mean, you look at, in our organization and, in a number of different companies as well, the amount of people that have transformation in their title, I sometimes find quite incredible because they're clearly not a part of leading that transformation. I think often companies too easy to kind of sit a team or a function alongside the business, dream up a whole lot of things that need to be done, and then try to apply that. I think you package it up like a beach ball, it just bounces off the organization. So I do think that if you're leading transformation, you have to be sitting alongside your peers. You have to be a part of the team, and within the product organization, I sit alongside all the heads of product, and sometimes I'm helping to lead that change, and sometimes I'm doing some of the administrative work for them, organizing the team meetings and etc. Yeah. But I think you have to be a part of that team, and I think you have to, I like that, you coined the phrase leadership as a service, and I think if you are, particularly if you're an external or a consultant transformation specialist, I think you have to insert yourselves into the leadership of the organization to really be almost a part of the change, rather than coming in and dictating how that should happen. So I think it's really important. I mean, leadership is, I think, a fundamental quality of good transformation people. Your quality transformation people, being good leaders, I think, is the number one quality that I think I would apply.
And that kind of leadership of a service model is really, kind of embedding yourself within the teams and within your peer group stakeholders, and and I think your approach, by the sound of it, is very hands-on in terms of leading from the front, helping to unblock things for your team members, trying to understand what the obstacles are, and helping the team move forward in that respect.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely. And
so,
no, you go ahead.
Yeah. So as part of that, we talked about this concept of almost developing a muscle memory within the team. So what does that mean to you, and how do you bring that about?
Yeah, I think it's, again, this concept of, if often we package up transformation programs and we do a set of slides, we say, okay, this is how it's going to be, this is what we wanted you to do, and again, that stuff just bounces off. And we've kind of had to understand, almost sometimes the hard way, of repeating the message again and again and again, and creating, as you say, that muscle memory, and repeating and iterating again and again and again. And this is why, and this is more latterly. I used to be a project manager back in the day. I needed to have a plan. I needed to say, okay, this is what we're going to do for the next 2 or 3 years. I think with transformation in such a fast moving environment, technology, digital transformation, particularly payments and fintech right now, you can't make that plan. You have to iterate and create the muscle memory and keep going and iterate again and improve and improve and improve. Now, we as part of the our product transformation, we created a playbook. So we created a playbook that was, the head of product kind of stood behind this playbook and said, okay, this is how we want to work. This is how we develop products. This is what we are. This is what we are not. This is, these are the things that we believe in. All of that stuff. And it was a great it was great collateral, but on its own, it wasn't enough. We actually had to go and do road shows around the organization with product managers, see the whites of their eyes, and talk to them about what this actually meant, and go through a kind of a whole series of tools and ways of working that would allow people to develop those principles. And sometimes that worked, sometimes that didn't work, and it didn't work because for many it was a big change. In fact, too big a change for them to kind of go from what they were doing today to that vision. So again, it's kind of repeating that, and it doesn't take weeks, it doesn't take months. In some cases, to shift the mindset, it takes years. But the repetition is how you create that muscle memory.
And is there a sense that if you invest a lot in a plan and developing a plan, then in some ways you can almost, I guess, overcommit to a plan that may not be leading towards the actual objective that you need to be achieving. Mainly because the objective might not be clear at the beginning, or the objective might change halfway through because the business environment changes and so on. So, is there a sense that like developing that kind of muscle memory within the team almost helps to give you some resilience against those changing conditions, so you can change direction if you need to without too much friction?
I think, resilience is a good word, and I'll come on to that maybe later on. But I think you can have a North Star, and I think we see that kind of phraseology used quite often in transformation. Have a North Star, something that we're moving towards. You don't know you don't necessarily know the plan, how you're gonna, the path to get there. It's like your sat nav. Sometimes, if there's a blockage in the road, it tells you to go a different path, but the destination is still the same, if you like. And I don't, business environment's changing. It sounds like a throwaway comment, but it's happening everywhere. And you just look at the past 5 years, not just in the company that I work for, but in all companies. We've gone through COVID, we've gone through economic issues that sometimes means you have to take a slightly different approach. And my approach is, and I've used it in the past, we sometimes use it where in Worldline is to think rather than of a transformation plan, almost a transformation maturity model, if you like. I know it sounds a bit old school, but those maturity models actually, particularly when you're assessing an organization, can become very helpful, particularly after, something like an M&A, post-merger integration. That assessment, having that vision of where you want to get to in terms of what does maturity mean to you, and,
Yeah.
assessing all of those parts of the organization, and then trying to move the needle, against that maturity model, I
Yeah.
think is a better way to think about it, rather than think, well, do you know what, 3 years we want to be here, and we're going to do it. This. Of course, plans help. Of course they do. I'm not going to say we throw plans away, but I think in a rapidly changing environment, you're only going to throw that plan out in 6 months.
So the model then is to really kind of invest in the team's ability, the team's resilience, help them just be the best possible team that they can be. Deliver that through service. Your leadership as a service to that team, and then I guess that enables them to course correct, change tack, pivot as they need to, depending on the conditions around them.
Yeah, and there's, I've talked about, leadership as service and me coming in to, provide that service, but it won't work unless you have strength of leadership within the team.
Yeah.
And and I'm sure that's the same for, well, I know it's the same for many transformation specialists, for folks who are running transformation initiatives. The people don't work for you, right? They don't work for you. They don't work
Yeah.
for me. So they can easily turn around and say, you know what, Paul, jog on.
Yeah.
Unless you've got
Yeah.
the leadership buy-in, if you're working within a management team, unless you've got the buy-in for what we're collectively doing, and they are prepared to initiate and follow through in that change with their teams that you mention, it's not going to happen. And we find that, there's some changes that we try to make that, the leadership team is bought in. Yeah, we absolutely want to do this. We want to carry that forward. I mean, I mentioned again, OKRs is a good example. Yeah, we will implement that. No problem at all. That change permeates within the organization and the muscle memory is created. But there's other changes that we've tried to implement that haven't worked because the leadership team hasn't bought into them. Fundamentally not bought into them. So it doesn't,
Yeah. Yeah.
it doesn't work. So I think
Yeah.
and I know many of your listeners might not like this. We can only institute so much, as transformation leaders, if the rest of the organization isn't bought in, if the leadership from the rest of the organization isn't bought in, it won't stick.
So we've talked a bit about some of the things that you've done to I guess create that culture to enable change. We talked about the role that OKRs play, and that it feels like the OKRs were quite a central part of your approach. If we could just dive into that in a bit more detail, why were they so critical? And I guess what was the gap that they plugged?
So, and I guess I hope everybody's familiar with OKRs and what they are.
Yeah, good point. Let's just so first of all, first question: what is an OKR?
So, an OKR is a method of really translating company strategy into execution. So, an OKR stands for Objective Key Result, and I think this concept of having company objectives has been around for many years. But the idea is that the game changer with OKRs is that you've got the key results at the end. So not only do you have the objectives, but you have a way of measuring whether you've hit those objectives. So we implemented them about 18 months, 2 years ago across the product organization. And the fundamental thing about OKRs, and here's why we think it was so important, is shifting from that, output mindset. So, we just deliver away, deliver what it is. We deliver products. We, deliver deliver code, deliver technology, deliver on platforms, moving away from that mentality that we just deliver things to an outcome focused mindset. So it's not just about what we deliver, it's about the value with which that brings. And that is easier said than done, and many will say, well, that's obvious, but in many companies it's not that obvious. So having OKRs to measure, having an objective of let's launch this product, okay, whatever that objective might look like, and then a key result that says, okay, well, we want 10 customers paying X million a year for that product by the end of year one, whatever it might be, is actually a way of measuring where you've been successful or not. So this was fundamental for us, particularly because we wanted to create strong empowerment within our product teams, because that was fundamental to, we can talk about strong product teams and the product model in a minute, but that was fundamental to the success of the organization. We wanted to shift away from this kind of, okay, often go to market, say, okay, here's what we think you should be delivering, product do the delivery. Product managers are effectively backlog managers. Turning that kind of mindset into, well, no, you need to care more about just what you're delivering. You need to care about the value that you're adding to the company. So that was why it was so fundamental. It's OKRs are one thing, but a change in mindset from output to outcomes was really important to us.
And I think that's a really good example of a methodology and a way of thinking that you've embedded into your way of operating that's really worked. But that's not the only thing that you've looked at. So you've looked at a number of different things, haven't you? And one of the things that we discussed was the Marty Kagan product model and how that relates to the work that you do. It'd be great to kind of break down that a bit. First of all, what is the Marty Kagan product model? What were you trying to achieve by looking at it? And I guess, what was your experience working with it?
Yeah, and I don't want to go into too much detail, because I'm sure I'll trip up if I try to kind of explain Marty Kagan's model for him. But the principle is that you create strong, empowered product teams that are, as I say, not just, they have a real focus on end to end, a real empowerment in terms of what they build and what they deliver, based on a collaboration with the rest of the business, go to market, customer services, risk, whoever it might be. Based on that collaboration, they decide what they're going to build. What are the challenges that customers face? What are the challenges we have in the market? What do we need in the market? The product team decide effectively what they're going to build and build the roadmap around it. Again, to many that might sound like it's 101, but many companies out there don't think like that. So that's, Mark Gaines wrote many books. You can go and read it for yourself. But we believed fundamentally we wanted to strengthen our product teams. Not people use the word product led. It's a dangerous It's quite dangerous, because, and I'll come on to that in a minute, because that creates resistance. We prefer to say, okay, well, it's about creating empowered product teams and strong product teams, rather than a kind of this idea of it product led and the product guys decide. Got to be slightly careful of that. And then it is a hard model to implement. We actually spent some time with Marty Kagan himself on calls to talk about some of the challenges that we had, and we were quite gung ho originally about, okay, let's do a big bang approach. Let's implement something called value streams. Let's, implement, this change in mindset. And he actually said at one point, you're going to do too much too quickly. The rest of the organization will not be bought into it. The leaders at the top will not be into it. And he said, So you should really think about piloting in particular sections of your organization, showing that something can work, and then taking that to the higher management to say, look, we've made this work. You can see it in the numbers. Revenue's up. We've kept the cost at X. Flat line. Profitability's there. This model really works, and that's we might have learned that the hard way actually. But
Yeah.
it's difficult to something quite difficult to implement.
Yeah, and I guess the learning there is, well, I guess there's a number of learnings there. But, one learning is you've got to try different techniques, haven't you? You've got to bring the methodologies in. You've got you've got to keep on, I guess, evolving your operating model, but not everything is going to work, is it? So I guess you don't be too hard on yourself if it if it
No,
doesn't, because things might look good in principle, but in practice, in the context of your organisation, they might not land in the same way that you might hope.
no, because I mean, there's no company's a vacuum, right? I mean, and you're not implementing. This
Yeah,
is why that there's a lot of theory out there. There's a lot of books about how to run companies and how to run organizations, and why this methodology is better than another methodology. The the reality is that it doesn't always work like that, because you have people within
yeah,
organizations, human beings that have their own agendas that come in and come out and want to start things new, and then you have external factors that downward pressure of revenue and cost, which means what, we can't do this right now, we've got to focus on something else. So it is changes. Just not sure if that phrase is going to stick, but that's it, it's true.
yeah,
Which is why
yeah,
is back to that North Star.
yeah.
You can't you can't just say this is how we're going to do it. I mean, I'll give you a good example. Product implementing the product model sounds great on paper, fantastic. You empower your product teams. They have more. They're more empowered to make decisions on where the products go to. I mean, we actually had a clash with our go-to-market, colleagues, our colleagues, right? Not people, not our competitors, our colleagues within the business. And the question was, who
Yeah.
decides? Somebody actually said that. Well, look, who decides? It came down to that. Who decides what we do? Who decides what we take? And nobody could really answer. Nobody could really answer the question. And that's where the kind of, you got this clash coming. And I think that's really important. You come back to, we talk about, you talk about digital transformation, you talk about technology platforms, you talk about changing product. Ultimately, it comes down to human beings, rightly or wrongly,
Yeah.
implementing whatever change it might be, you know.
I, I think it's always good to remember the original definition of a company is just a collection of individuals. Yeah, yes, agreeing to come together for a common purpose, but still at the end of the day, a group of individuals, and it comes down to that human element, doesn't it?
Yeah,
Aligning hearts and minds, and that phrase, a North Star, has come up, a couple of times. I think that's really interesting because it feels like a North Star has some, like, almost some constructive ambiguity about it. It doesn't need to be so detailed that it forces people down a track which might not be appropriate, but at the same time, it's palpable enough to give people a common, a common goal.
yeah, and it might be perceived as being a little bit fluffy and not go down well in particular types of organization. But I think, particularly in uncertain environments, I think you've just got to. I mean, the idea of a North Star is for navigation, right? Navigation through choppy waters. You don't know how you're going to get
Yeah,
through it, but you've got
yeah,
that vision,
yeah,
and I think a playbook does help. On determining that vision, even if even if the detailed plan isn't there. So I think it's an important concept, particularly today in today's transformation.
So we talked a bit about that process of mergers and acquisitions, and I thought it was really interesting what you said about applying that digital maturity model to help you understand what an incoming product, how well it's put together or how well it's going to be a fit within the organization and what might need to change. What happens on the day that kind of that product comes in and you kind of, I guess, take ownership of it? What does that like post merger integration look like? How do you start moving it from the state at which it comes in to that more integrated way of operating, so it's part of the whole business?
Well, yeah, that's it in a nutshell. How do you do it?
Yeah, yeah,
And there's a number of different approaches. I think first of all, usually when companies come in or platforms or products come in, there is a period to stabilize, I guess, within a new organization. I think the communication piece becomes super important. Spending time with that new organization becomes super important, and again, not going in there with a fundamental plan of how it's going to happen, but working up an understanding with that those new teams, and working on a plan together. Stating what the North Star looks like. This is what we got. This is where we want to get to. But how do we get there together? I think it is a mistake, and I've seen it. It's a mistake to apply. This is our way of working. You have to bend to it. Basically, it doesn't work, and it will create resistance. A number of years ago, I worked in the ATM industry, and we merged a couple of ATM organizations, and I quite liked it. The CEO at the time said, he had this slide that he loved, which was, this is the culture of this side of the business, and this is this culture of the other side of the business. And I think he had two different cars. I think one was a Volvo, and the other one was a Lamborghini or whatever it was. But now we're neither. We're not either of those things anymore. We're not either of those companies anymore. We're something different together.
Yeah.
So I think that communication, settling things down into understanding what that culture looks like when you bring two organizations together, I think is really important. But I think, again, back to North Star, talk about where you want to get to and then collaborate on how you want to get there. And that's maybe where the maturity model comes back in, rather than applying a blam, there's the plan, just jump to it, which often has resistance. How do you collectively get there to that North Star? I mean, it might sound a bit fluffy again, but I think it's the only way to approach it. Understand what you've got, and then work on the solution.
It's almost like if it were any more defined, then it would be set up to fail. If your kind of North Star is very, very pinned down, then you almost set yourself up for a fall, don't you? That's something that needs to be defined as you learn how that product is going to integrate into the wider environment.
Yeah. And and you know what? In some cases, maybe you leave it alone.
Do nothing.
If it ain't broke type. I know it sounds like an old school thing to say, but there's often, and I've lived through it, where you try to apply a way of working, you try to apply something, to an organization that maybe they're further ahead than you are. Maybe you want to reverse. Use what they've done and what they've got and apply it to your own organisation. Um, and
Yeah.
I've seen it work both ways. I've seen it work both ways with the same company, actually. you know,
Yeah.
one approach with one organisation, leave it alone, let it go on with it, let it grow, let it mature, let it hit the targets it continually hits. Same organisation, no, we want to bring them in, we want to integrate them more. It breaks them because
Yeah.
if again,
Yeah.
down to people, if they don't like the way you operate, they'll go, they'll leave.
So this it feels like there's no kind of one size fits all to it, to any of the work that you do, and the impression I get is that you're thinking
what,
very
what are you
carefully,
trying to say, Julian?
and well, I'm trying to say that you need to be a very kind of like resourceful and adaptable individual to work in this kind of like multi-product, multi-stakeholder, multi-culture environment. It feels like you've got to be highly resourceful and adaptive to all these different circumstances. How do you build and retain that resilience to be able to deal with all of these different kind of moving parts? How do you build your own kind of personal capability to operate in this environment?
Yeah, well, I mean, personally, that's grown over many years of being in different, going through different experiences. I think
The hard way. You've learned the hard way, is what you're saying.
gone round the hard, the really hard way. I mean, and there's certain things that I mean, I'm not kidding when I say this. There's certain, when you think back, I do have certain moments in my career where you can feel that resilience, that shell
Yeah.
being built. I mean, uh, I remember, and I think it was probably my first experience of what transformation really is. I mean, I was happily working away as, running programs and projects and heading up PMOs. I was the ops director in an small IT managed services company, got taken over by PE. It was a PE company. Then another. It was quite hostily taken over, and I remember the point where uh, basically the new owners landed in the office on the day and started to kind of call in people for all
Right.
these meetings. And they called me in and said,
Yeah.
you know, uh, we think the organization's too heavy. We think you can lose X million. We think you can lose, X hundred people, and you're going to do it for us. And that was probably the point that I became.
Yeah.
That was my first transformation, basically, at that point. So
Yeah.
that experience built the resilience, and I think it just does come over time. I mean, when I look for people that understand how to do transformation, I think you do have to be experienced. I think there has to be you've got to have been through a number of roles, um, different roles, to really understand how change works. Maybe I'm wrong, but I think
Yeah.
for me I took the long way around. Sorry, a little bit of a foray into my my career history.
No, no, I think that's really interesting. It's really interesting. There are people, obviously. There's a new generation coming into
Yeah,
our industry, and I think we've had you know let's say 25 years of just like incredible
yeah,
change, and no doubt before that there was 25 years of incredible change before that. But just looking at it through the lens of what's happened over the past couple of generations, it's been like
yeah,
tumultuous, both in terms of how what businesses are able to achieve through digital mediums, how businesses make the most of that, the risks that those mediums bring around, and then also stuff that happens in the environment. We talked a bit there about COVID. We talked a bit about some of the disruption that's gone on. Kind of macroeconomic disruption that's gone on, and I think that's yeah the experience that you build up is built up in the context of all of that,
Yeah,
isn't it? It's you kind of you build in another layer, I guess. Each go around until you're kind of you have that overall resilience.
yeah, and don't get me wrong. I mean, I'm not saying that it's only the only the old folks can do transformation. I mean, where the last couple of years I've learned, I'd almost a symbiotic relationship with my boss, who was the chief product officer. And she was entrepreneurial, had come from that kind of new age tech kind of part of the world, and I learned an incredible amount from
Yeah,
her in terms of I didn't know what the product model was previously. I didn't know any of that
yeah,
stuff,
yeah.
but I was able to apply my experience with change and work with her on her vision basically of what she wanted her product organization to work with, and that worked very well. But I think
Mm.
the how how we run companies and how we run tech companies changes every year. It changes every couple of years. So
Yeah,
you that,
yeah.
that's bad. I could be guilty of bad muscle memory. You know, you got to
Mm.
keep learning and keep understanding how things are moving on.
And you've spent the majority of your career working specifically within the fintech space. I mean, you mentioned, obviously working with ATMs back in the day, and now you're working on payment gateways. And yeah, there's been a huge amount of disruption, I guess, in that space. What's what are the features of working in fintech? How does it differentiate from, I don't know, working in pharma or in financial services more widely, or in public sector? What do you think are the unique features of the fintech sector?
I think you're often working in an environment where compliance and regulation is pretty important.
Mm.
So you know trying to make change within that environment can often be challenging. And regulation, happens, you know, periodically. I mean, we've been through PSD2, we've been
Yeah,
through a number of changes, regulatory changes over the last 10 years, and there's more coming. Um, so that's a big influence on the organization. It's been incredibly disruptive in the last 10 years, particularly pay tech. Multiple
yeah,
disruptors coming in, who are often eating the lunch of some of those older. That's not the right way to put it. One of the more
more established. Yeah,
established companies, and
yeah,
it's very difficult for them.
yeah,
It's very difficult for them. And also, I'd say, some of these, what we're dealing with in terms of tech and platforms, our merchants, our customers, some of it is so ingrained in what they do. You have have a
mm,
big retailer. If the payment platform goes down, then they can't sell anything. They can't. You saw what happens with a power cut in Spain and Portugal, and the whole. You can't do anything.
yeah,
You can't do anything, right? If your
yeah,
payment
yeah,
if your payment service provider isn't operating, then you're not in business. So it is so fundamental
yeah,
to our customers, and they just expect it to work. And
mm,
that also is a challenge when, particularly after M&A, and all companies have this, but particularly after M&A, particularly when you're trying to consolidate, platforms,
mm,
trying to migrate customers from one platform to another is challenging. Takes a lot of time,
mm,
because they don't want to do it. They're like, they don't want
yeah,
to do it, and as with all these things, you tell a customer, oh, can you migrate from one platform to the other? You can do it. You can try to do it as seamlessly as possible, right? And majority of the times we're able to do that. But if you try, you talk to a customer about moving from one platform to another, they'll say, okay, yeah, that's great. We're just going to see what else is out there while we're doing that.
Yeah.
We're just going to see what your competitors are
Yeah.
doing right now, and that happens a lot.
Yeah.
That happens a lot. It's in all companies that go through that, but particularly around fintech, particularly around pay tech, it is challenging. Um, to do that, very challenging.
Well, Paul, it's been really, really great talking with you this morning, and I just want to thank you so much. Is there anything that I haven't asked that you think I should have asked?
I I had notes for about double double the conversation. No, I mean I liked your you asked about change agents, and that was something that in Change Network that really resonated with me when you
I
you know
think that was a really, really interesting perspective. Absolutely.
yeah.
Yeah.
And I mean I think change networks I think are really important to making your transformation to happen, and the right people to be a part of that network I think is also so important. So that's one of the key things that I think is where we do it we're successful, where we don't do it we're not successful. But yeah, there you go. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
Paul, I just want to thank you so much. It's been really great talking with you this morning, and wish you very best for the rest of your day.
Thank you very much. Cheers, Jules.